Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this good? Okay, cool. So the concept for my reading tonight is kind of like a funnel. Ideally, it'll be great because everything gets shorter. So like the first piece that I read will be the longest. So when/if you start to get bored, just think the next piece is shorter and you can just focus in on that. But yeah, just kidding. I hope you don't get bored. So the first thing I want to read is some microfiction, and I wanted to read this because I felt it kind of went along with the theme of Easter in terms more of like death and the body rather than like Easter bunnies or Easter eggs. So yeah, it's creepy, but the issue was that I use a footnote in this story, and it's at the very end of the story, and to quote David Foster Wallace, this presents kind of a nasty problem for reading out loud. Where do footnotes go? There is no bottom of the page at a reading. So he was talking about audiobooks, but I think it still applies. His solution for the audiobook was to kind of like add in a wonky voice or like a slightly lower volume. I'm not going to do that. I think my solution is going to be a lot more obvious, and I'm just going to look at you and say, this is a footnote, and you'll know. Okay. So here we go. This is titled Elena. You don't think I should have done it, but I did. I married the girl whose life depended on me. She was pale beautiful, a full moon, luminescing under dark hair and eyelashes. She smiled gently, full of effort, on her thinly sheeted hospital bed and asked where I was from. A tiny New England town. Used to be a fishing village, but the fishermen moved on. I grew up in a cottage near a rocky cove. How about you, ma'am? Further south, nowhere worth mentioning after that. I've always wanted to see the ocean. She wondered feebly about the world outside, and I reported back after lunch. It was humid, and here's the damp crease of my elbow beating through my shirt to prove it. A butterfly fanned its wings on the sidewalk beside me, and I caught it in a folded newspaper, rushing inside for a jar with holes poked through the top. Tears slipped through her temples as I placed it at her bedside. She was the purest thing I'd ever touched, the purest woman who ever lived. Black-capped chickadees hummed outside her window the day I took her thin hand and bent to whisper that I'd like her to be my wife. Her few relatives would not make the trip north for a wedding, she told me. I waited until she finished her dress. She worked for months, stitching, unstitching, asking for lace. She knotted gauze and cotton into the lining, so the skirt ballooned and swung around her the day we stood on raised rocks beside the ocean with a priest. She'd made it too big for her hollow body. She was a paper lantern. The sea jumped into the air, and foam crashed around us when we kissed. She said the water was not hers or ours, but I said maybe it lent its blessing and sang her toward health still. We came home to the property on the edge of Mount Hope Point afterward. It was a small affair, just a few friends, but how the papers loved it. There was a front-page story on the frail, perfect young woman and her doctor who had stopped going into the hospital to instead work tirelessly on curing her. She looked beautiful in the picture. I had a lab off the kitchen. She sat on the porch, under comforters and quilts, salt air flecking the screen before her. She crept closer to the screen. She lay on the ground in front of it, right at the door, and held her fingers to the mesh. I broke for lunch one afternoon and found her outside, against the foundation next to the porch steps. Her quilt was wet and chilled with sweat, and her head rested on the grass. I held her in my arms, and she was so light I could have balled her up and thrown her to the sea from where I stood. I wrapped the blanket tighter around her and wept as I carried her, and she slept soundly and still on my shoulder. A fly buzzed in concentric orbit around our heads, tying our skulls together with its trajectory. She was too weak to speak. I hired a nurse to watch her and worked longer hours. I was close to a discovery. I could feel it, up ahead, around the bend, taunting me. I instructed the nurse to bring her food. Blood oranges with red insides, carrot soup stewed under a crescent moon. I filled the tub with seawater and bathed her in the salt. She floated. "Tell me when it snows?" she asked in a whisper. I heard her clearly, as clear as ever. "Of course, my love, anything." Are the marsh foxes in the sea reeds? Has the mother had her pups? I'll check tomorrow, beautiful. Get some rest. We slept curled into our mattress on the floor of the darkened bedroom so that if she rolled off in the night, she wouldn't damage herself. I ran my hands over her smooth, cool skin. Her breasts shrunk more each day, but her nipples still hardened under my fingertips. A week after the fox's pups left their den, a man in a black hat came to our door and knocked. "You're Mr. Van Coughlin?" the stranger asked, without his mustache moving. "Yes." "Where's your wife, sir?" "Why do you ask?" I leaned against the door jamb. "We need to speak with her directly." "She's resting. She hasn't been well." "We know. We need to see her." The nurse I'd hired long ago stepped out from behind the man. He stormed to the bedroom and saw my wife lying on the bed, her black hair swirled loosely around her, flies twitching their tiny legs as they crawled along her stomach. The man ordered me outside. He used our phone to call an ambulance. I waited by the same place she'd sat, against our house's base. I felt the brown grass matted beneath me where her head had lain. They carried her out on a board, zipped into a black plastic casing, but I could see where her bony shoulders pressed tiny corners against the shape. The nurse stared at me the whole time. I watched the ocean's blue-green churn under gray clouds. It still hadn't snowed. Had it? A humming lifted off the sea. The papers ran a new story the next day, a different story. They printed pictures of my bride without her face, bones where her pink cheeks had been, and holes for eyes. They thought I was a murderer. They thought I could have found a cure. I sat with a detective for days, or maybe years, and answered questions about my work, my research, and my lab. They forced pictures of Elena into my hands, made me stare at her while they stood over my shoulder, gave me an autopsy report. Eventually, they let me go. I found where they'd put her. There was no headstone, just a mound of freshly stacked dirt on the thawing ground. I went every evening to visit. I tried not to tell her about the headlines the newspapers kept churning out, their slander. I wrote a letter to one editor. It read, "Ever since the moon began to wane, Elena has begun to sing in her casket with a very soft, clear voice, which becomes just a little stronger night to night. Always the same old Spanish song about a lover who opens the grave of his dead bride. I distinctly hear and understand every word." Here is the footnote. This note that you've just heard consists of the actual words of a man named Carl Tanzler. He wrote them about the love of his life, a woman named Elena Milagro de Hoyos. He had developed an obsession for Elena, who was a young tuberculosis patient of his, and that obsession carried on well after she'd already died from the disease. The end. Cool. Okay. I don't think the rest are as creepy. But I have a mixture of poems and some microfiction, and this next poem goes well with the piece before it because it also is about a true thing that actually happened. It's called Night Vision. We had a not-so-fast car that shuddered and shook down monumental, mostly wild interstates in the dark that came slipping over us as afterbirth of a purple golden twilight. We had rock-stack mountains rising. We had red shadows in the feathery field, only visible in silhouette as we bumped the Hold Steady album we had burned onto a CD and smoked a stolen cigarette we had between our fingers on the way to freedom. We had his toes on the gas. We had mine on the dash. We had desert in the rear view. We had it spreading at our shoulders. We had prickly pear and yucca we couldn't see out there to the right of us, busy existing in the dark defiantly. We had 5 hours till morning light, cutting our brights for oncoming cars, and because we had to get a look at those stars, we had heavy lids. We had us runaways. We had hurrying to a motel room. We had streaming, slipping, shuddering, just outside the Arizona line. We had sinewed bodies, spectral in silver light, and eyes that saw something. We had something on the road. We had something emerge from the night haze, step hoof first to the asphalt. They had hides and haunches that moved but didn't. They had glinting manes that froze still in headlight beams. They passed quickly from peripheral nowhere and nothing into soft grayscale flesh. They were immaterial dreams. They condensed faintly in the wind. They were so tall. 1, 2, 3, maybe a fourth, a full, I think. Inches away, not feet. Did they see us? We had blinking eyeballs, blinked too long and braked, shuddered breaking. They had orb eyes that glowed. Milky shadows, tinted fishbowls. They had wiry ropes of horsehair, and it pushed and brushed the side view mirror before floating back to the darkness we had on our left, the other side of the road. They had no notion we were there, and we had nowhere specifically to be. They had wide open space to fill. Okay, they're getting shorter, as is the funnel, or the upside-down pyramid scheme, as my friend Stephen said a second ago. Okay, this one is called Cleanliness. It's just really short microfiction, and the character's name in this piece is Desi. And when I wrote it, I wasn't thinking about Desi Linden, but then Desi Linden was the 4th overall finisher at the Boston Marathon for women today, so raise your glasses to Desi. And I'll try not to think about her when I read this, because it's kind of weird. Okay. Desi's face was dewy, smooth, and clear. It got her all the guys she could want in junior high, which wasn't many, since she wasn't boy crazy. It got her a serious boyfriend freshman year, who she went all the way with before dumping. Junior year, red ridges shot across her forehead, and Desi freaked. She drove to a dermatologist's office 3 hours away. The doctor prescribed a cleanser, but warned Desi not to overuse it. Once a day was all. Desi obeyed, and the mounds turned to bumps. They shrank, until they didn't. Until they turned a corner and came back with gusto, scarring even the tips of her eyelids. Desi dumped more into her palm. She washed twice a day. The redness faded, kept fading. Her skin went beige, then gray, before completely white, and then translucent. You could see veins like spider webs in her cheeks and her gums butting up against her lips. Still, Desi thought the pimples might come back. She washed a 3rd time, then toweled off, and a chunk of her chin fell into her palm. It jiggled like a dead jellyfish. It glittered. She dropped it down the drain and wet her face to wash again. Okay, that's it. Okay, and now we're just doing poems here on out, just a few more. And to start us off with this conclusion of poems, I'm going to do like an Ars Poetica type thing. It's called Bathroom Stall Poet. Where would a poem start? A story, maybe. Starting here. Shadow of a twisted branch crashing through the highest window, reflected on a tiny man's pocked face. An insecurity, like a pit in the stomach of love that means it's just no longer easy. Life in loops, living moments till they're empty, silk essentials, commercial real estate, bins of price tags. Or does it begin again in a bathroom stall, in the back of an unlit building, where a drunk poet would piss a little on the seat and zip her pants, then rummage through her purse, just hanging from the hook right near her head, and pull out a check that bounced, still bouncing, in her hand, and find a Sharpie to write all over it, and then her wrists, and then the stall with God is peakish, belted sunrise, Zeevelbub. Okay. So this next poem has a bad word in it. Actually has 2 bad words in it. I'm gonna say it anyways, I think. It's not that bad. You'll see. But basically, I don't really love the idea of like commodification of politics in terms of like people taking like the word nasty, for example, and rebranding that to like wear shirts that say nasty, because I think it's awesome that people are kind of claiming the word nasty and embracing it and empowering themselves through it, but it's shitty that random companies are making money off of that. So I wanted to just think about the word nasty and what it means and nastiness in general. So I wrote this poem, and it's called Nasty As. So I feel like a bit of a hypocrite, but I'm not making any money off of this. A little bit of money. Okay. It's called Nasty As. Nasty as they come. Nasty as they came when there was a finger placed just right for the first time in their lives. Chills down the back of your spine, nasty, like all that gunk stacked up under the carburetor of your mother's used minivan. And the black mucus thick in her eyelids corners from sleeping with cheap and clumped mascara. Nasty as we were born, all of us. Covered in red and sweat and slime. Nasty as a twisted ankle halfway out on a day-long run. Nastier than what you scrape out of the shower's drain when you can no longer stand the foot of water piling at your shins. Nasty as words. Nasty ass words. Nepotism, pussy, cunt, slab, coagulation, fester, mucus, fascism, engorged, bitch, throbbing, courtesan, quartered, tremendous, huge. Okay, this is where the funnel breaks down, guys. I'm sorry, we're very close to the end, but there were two poems I wanted to read in a row, and the second one is longer than the one that's gonna come, oh no, the second one is shorter than the one that's gonna come after it, whatever. Okay, this poem is called Last Night, and the next one is also called Last Night, so they had to be read in a row. But okay, Last Night. Last night, the wind forgot to keep our dear girl careful. Her bones sang out in bed. She sat straight up and took off running, barefoot, covers thrown off, crumpled on the ground. Doors, out of screen mesh or smudged glass or smooth wood, could not hold her. She hid nothing, not her pink freckles, not her thighs' slight meat, crashing through midnight reeds, her hair, down and loose, bounced until darkness caught a glimpse and came grasping. The night took what it saw and wanted, and the wind did not speak up. Last night, again. Last night, the moon packed up and left, remembered her old haunts and flew to them, left us without a tide, bereaved fishermen, empty waiters in our seaside town. Fish flipping to their backs along the drying strands of seaweed on the shore. Okay, this is the last poem. And I was inspired to write this during a really long flight where I almost missed my connection going to Florida, and I was sitting very close to a screaming child. But it's not the kind of poem that's like, I hate screaming children. You'll see. Okay, it's called Flying. I sat 2 rows behind the baby. I heard its beautiful mewling cry. Such femininity already. Do you think that's possible? Tone, pitch, all of it. An owl conversation. Tiny melodies of sorrow. She was so much a person already, quirks and hiccups in her screams. She was my sister, grieving a spouse in her half-sleep. She was my grandmother, tired from too much to name. She was me, sobbing more often than not. Or she was a small coyote, howling her lines from memory. That's it.